Hello, I'm Chris Godber. Welcome to my channel. It's a basic channel about my artwork, philosophy, and sometimes comedy, whatever. I mean, it's basically a bit of all sorts. But I wanted to talk today about something that has been a long, ongoing debate, and it's popping up again in the media um, in relation to Picasso. Um, which is, well, if you wanted to put it in a phrase, artist behaving badly. Can you separate the art from the artist, as it were? I mean, with Picasso, this usually comes up because of he's considered a misogynist. He hated women or treated women badly, and you could probably say that this occurred in his, you know, in his work as well, like the Weeping Woman, for example, or yada yada yada. You know what I mean? Sort of like it's sometimes included in the broader discussion around cancel culture and that sort of thing. But I'm going to basically just in this video talk about my own thoughts on this, and yeah, just that basically. I'm going to do this as a stream of consciousness, so it might be pauses, blah 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 blah. And won't necessarily represent like I said, stream of consciousness. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's my final thoughts on this, just my current thinking. Anyway, all that out of the way. So my essential view on this, and I'm a painter myself. Look, I'm involved in art. I make art, so it's something I'm obviously quite aware of. But I think in the case of Picasso, and I will obviously broaden it out to more other examples, I think, and my more general attitude to this sort of thing is, I think it's part of a larger fixation we have in culture or popular culture of fixation on identity, which I don't think necessarily is that relevant, right? I'll go on to the bad behaviour aspect of it later, but in general, I think the trend towards hyperfixating on markers of identity isn't necessarily that relevant often. I mean, obviously, it will obviously come into the production of an artwork, I suppose, one's own experience. Privilege obviously is the big thing that gets brought up these days in this sort of culture, which is, and cultural production isn't outside of that world, right? I do think it is, though, too emphasised. And this is probably going to sound a bit ideal, right? But I think if I'm going into an art gallery with zero awareness, for example, of a painter or an artist's work, I look at a painting, it's there in front of me, and I can connect to it. Or I love the painting just on an aesthetic level, maybe on a social, political level, whatever, like a message it's trying to convey. Then, obviously, those things, those expressions don't come from nothing, right? Obviously, but whether the artist who produced it is male, female, trans, whether they are educated, self-taught, whether they are working class or come from a more privileged, moneyed background. Now, this might be a bit naive, but in a lot of ways, I don't care. Like if I'm looking at a painting and it, I somehow resonate with the image. Why should it matter whether the person who made it was white, whether they were black, whether they were male, whether they were female? And on a bigger level, on a more in-depth level, whether they're a quote-unquote nice person, or whether they, would, if they're dead artists, whether they would be judged morally in line with the morality of the day, or the prevailing morality, right? Because morality isn't a fixed thing. No, this is a Nietzschean thing in some respects, or a Nietzschean view, but it isn't. I mean, you can argue that it is. You can argue that there's some sort of universal morality, but I would say, in my view, if you actually examine it, morality is constantly changing and evolving with society. So society changes, and not even evolving, it's given the wrong connotation, because that suggests that we're progressing towards something, sort of Hegelian end of history sort of idea or whatever, which I don't really subscribe to. I don't think history ever ends. I think it's always going to go on changing. Now, you can subjectively say these things are positive or negative, but blah blah blah. I'm rambling too much now. But in Picasso's case, for example, I'm already 6 minutes in and I've got it going too much off the rails. Picasso, yeah, okay, in many respects, he was a possessive lover. The thing that people often say of Picasso is that he destroyed the women he was with. He's married several times, had many different partners, lovers, etc. He sort of the criticism that's often leveled at Picasso is that he used the women, and they are a key subject actually in Picasso's work as well, is the women that were in his life, and the accusation now being leveled at him, I suppose, is that he's just a misogynistic user of women, and so this is quite difficult territory to go into, right? Obviously, it's quite fraught. People get emotional about all this. But Picasso isn't here to defend himself at the end of the day. He's dead. He's been dead since, the 1960s, I think it was. Lived up to 90. He's not here. He can't defend himself. I think, as well, like him or dislike him as a person, I don't think you can deny that he was important in the development of modernism and modernist painting in the 20th century. Certainly in the early 20s, with the development of Cubism, which, whether you like the man or not, is a fact. And yes, there are other people involved in the development of Cubism. George Braque, of course. The futurists, in some respects, also were sort of playing with that style, and it was emerging. It was an emerging breakdown and fragmentation. Lots of people have got theories about what Cubism was trying to represent, why it emerged as a sort of evolution out of abstraction, sort of moving post-impressionism forward, changing, shifting perspectives, representation of time. Also the development of cinema, I think, was actually quite key to paint. And the reason that Braque and Picasso decided to experiment with this more fragmentary visual style, as it were, is to see, because basically photography obviously was a huge challenge to the validity of painting in the 20th century. And even, the development of photography in general, when it started, was seen as a threat. Because if you view what painting was for actually hundreds of years before, obviously it was many different things, but on the whole, for many painters, they were representing patrons, doing portraits. They were trying to capture a representation of reality in some way. Obviously, okay, there'd be a degree of interpretation of what they were. You're still dealing with paint, representing something in reality with that, right? But it was, it was photography. Obviously, could be seen as a threat. So the Cubists, in many respects, were seeing, right, well, let's do something that only painting can do. And whether you think Picasso was a massive ass or not, his ability to paint was cannot really be questioned. And if you know anything about Picasso's actual output, he was actually a brilliant marksman. No, marksman? He's not a sniper, is he? Draftsman, sorry. He was an excellent draftsman. He could paint very well by the age of like 15. By adolescence, he had already mastered like representational art. Well, not mastered. I mean, obviously, probably still could have got better at that sort of classical painterly representation. But he decided to go a different path. That is why he's considered important, because he was sort of the quintessential avant-garde painter of the 20th century. And in a lot of ways, he was in the right place at the right time. I was in Paris, the 20s. And he did actually start, if you look at Picasso's early work, he was, like a lot of artists, he was started off aping or sort of copying sort of post-impressionism, especially for artists at that time. And I mean, if you're a painter, this is how nearly all painters start. They start by, it's almost impossible to avoid that. Even for my case, like I started off doing bad Kandinsky knockoffs because when I was self-taught. Sorry, I had to start somewhere, and you start with a known quantity, right? You start with replicating something that is already out there. Then through experimentation and chance and being exposed to lots of literature, lots of culture, lots of experiences in life, you try and move into something new, which is more your own. And you fail and you succeed at other times. Anyway, I'm getting off track now. This is going to be quite a rambling video. Like I said, I'm not going into this for any specific plan. Obviously, it's fine that the art in general is a big thing. It's like any other world. Like the music world has different parts to it. So does art. In the music world, you've got the music industry, which is a business. It's about production and marketing, blah, 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 blah. It's more of a business thing. And you've got artists themselves actually making the music. Same with art. You have the actual artists themselves who are making the art. You have a curational sort of administrative layer to it. You have the galleries. But obviously money comes into art as well. And then you have like obviously the public sector part of it. Or, well, sort of public, but you've got galleries whose job really is to archive art history. That is really what a gallery is about. Now, I guess if I have a problem with, I don't mind, obviously. Curators can curate an exhibition however they want, and you are free to think about those exhibitions however you wish. There obviously has to be freedom, the intellectual freedom for curators to curate however they want. But yeah, I suppose if I have a critique of, you can't really cancel Picasso. I mean, a few of the articles that come out about this has just said like, okay, we can retroactively judge the behaviour, but denying his place as an actual painter on a technical level is just pointless. Yeah, sure, you can. It just historically, it doesn't make any sense in the history of art history, right? To just throw him out, it would be a ridiculous rewriting of history if that happens because of, he was probably I think he was a possessive man often. Quite selfish maybe in some respects, but artists like there's this Billy Childish quote I think I heard, like, that's a documentary. Artists are not perfect people. They're not really that different from anybody else, apart from obviously they're talented at art, right? There's no, people. Sometimes even artists do this as well. They put themselves on a sort of pedestal, like almost like I'm above other people, or I understand the world more than other people, or whatever. It can be a bit of a self-aggrandizing thing, and I've probably been guilty of this myself. And I know even further, like in relation to my own work, not that I'm not a famous artist, I'm not like, I do okay, but like I'm not that well established, sort of emerging, I guess, in some respects. But I'm not like, it's not something I expect to make any living from, like in a full-time level, anytime soon, if ever. But at the end of the day, for myself, I know I'm not a perfect person. I know I wouldn't say I'm misogynistic, but I'm not a perfect person. I've had to evolve views. I've done things which I'm not obviously. But then, I think even just being a person, I think if you're a human being, if you haven't made any mistakes, then you're lying to yourself. I just think it's ridiculous to hold up again people that have been dead often for a long time who might have produced visual art up to a moral standard which is constantly changing anyway. Like if you look at so this is always the example that people use, but it's a good one. Caravaggio, he was a genius. Come on, like he painted for his the way he changed religious art and the sort of artwork that he was doing at the time was in a lot of ways revolutionary. But he was also a bit of a thug. I mean, he was like sort of a gang man. He was he killed a man probably by accident with a sword in sort of brawl that they had. And now murder, obviously. No, I think obviously anyway. Misogyny is bad, right? But murdering someone is literally murdering someone is worse ethically, I think. But still, I mean, Caravaggio shouldn't be wiped from the sort of cultural map because he was, in many respects, a very cynical, violent human being. And there are lots of examples of this, like of artists who are in a lot of ways either violent people, violent souls, or otherwise wouldn't be considered, sort of ethical bastions, right, of ideal behaviour. But then what is that anyway? Look, that changes all the time. Look, if you were born in ancient Rome, like a few thousand years ago, then the idea of what is, how you should live life and how you should conduct yourself would be very different today. Like if you were born in ancient Rome once more, then you wouldn't have a problem. Oh yeah, I'm just going down the arena to watch a bunch of gladiators kill each other. And that was viewed as an entertainment. Today, that idea would be horrendous. We would balk at that because we've developed our civilization, somewhat to the point where we have reality TV and all that crap still, unfortunately, which is essentially just, voyeuristic in a very less harmful way, but still voyeuristic and sort of, ridiculous. But I mean, we've changed, as evolved as a culture. I mean, an interesting thing with Picasso actually as well. Of course, he was obsessed with bullfighting and all that. It was often tied in with his macho sort of image, painting the Minotaur and everything. And that side of him was, I think, a lot of his was machismo, right? I guess. Bacon, Francis Bacon as well, the British painter. Probably, he had a sort of fixation on violence, which showed itself in his work. Sort of sadomasochistic thing going on with Bacon as well, with his lovers as well, various male lovers. Which, I mean, at the end of the day, if that was his expression of his sexuality, it went into his work, and there are people who relate to that or see something in it which expresses something which exists in human nature, the underlying violence of humanity, obviously Bacon had a big fixation on violence. He talks about it constantly in his work. Many artists do have a fixation on violence. I think even myself, I'm not. I wouldn't say my images are always violent. They vary. It depends on what I'm trying to focus on, or what I'm making, or what I'm basically the imagery I'm working with at the time. But it exists within human beings. So do I think? I know I'm going off on this. Like I said, this is a stream of consciousness. Do I think all artwork should not look at, should look or shy away from difficult subjects? No. I mean, obviously, art's job, if it has any, is to look into the corners of the human existence and human life, which are not always pleasant. It's like, obviously, it's a very slippery slope if anyone tries to dictate this is what art is, this is what art isn't. I mean, extreme end of that, you get the degenerate art exhibition that the Nazis did, trying to control and censor expressionism and equate the emerging expressionistic art movement, and they also jazz and all this is blatantly racist. with degeneracy. Now that's a separate, probably conversation to the Picasso example, but I just think essentially what I'm just saying is like, yes, you can separate the art from the artist. Obviously, there are biographical. If you're looking into the life of an artist, there are important. You can most artists have obsessions, and you can sort of. It's interesting to research all those things when you look into the life of an artist and how it relates to their artwork, and that's the job of researchers and curators and blah 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 to do that. But I just think basically that if we start viewing everything through a lens of a morality today, which is also morality, like even in like popular culture and the culture wars and everything at the minute, is in a lot of flux and chaos. Like we've got this huge debate, which is often being stirred up by the right wing. To be fair, about like trans issues and trans identity and all that. And then because we've got this information space that we live in now, obviously it's always trying to be churned around and distorted, or it's just made out to be something that's huge, or I don't know, like is a massive thing that we should all be fighting about all the time. And we have witnessed in a lot of ways that I think there is a censorious trend, which I don't particularly find very good. Well, not very good, but I just think it's maybe a bit worrying in culture. To say something that's quite potentially provocative. Now, I'm not really a fan of J.K. Rowling or even her views. I don't particularly. I think a lot of the time she's also being quite provocative, almost for the sake of it, and then sort of like has a sort of plausible deniability. But like at the end of the day, like I think there is just all this mudslinging going on there. This is a broader point at all. In cancel culture and how it's constantly just being put into our feeds and just going on. It just all revolves around. It's like a spiral of meaningless horseshit in a lot of ways. Two sides that basically just don't agree. And I guess there is something here because there are real consequences for all these beliefs in the world. I've gone off on one now. I've gone off track. Anyway, I want to leave the point there because I don't know what point I'm trying to make. But yeah, basically, I think curators have a responsibility, I guess, just to if they're going to produce decent, interesting exhibitions, if they're looking certainly at the artists of the past, yeah, they do have a responsibility to represent their actual views and their history and all that. I would just caution probably against judgment coming from above. They should just put the information out there and then you make your own opinion. And to be honest, this is only my opinion, but whenever I go into a gallery, I spend as little time looking at all the blurb, like this long blurb next to a painting. I might look at bits of it, obviously, to be at the medium time when it was made, blah blah blah. First thing I do when I go into a gallery, before I look at this artist was a female artist she explored ideas of feminism and representation and the male gaze. The first thing I do is when I go into any exhibition, is look at the work. All the other stuff, yes, all the other information is interesting. It helps put their work in context, and obviously there's some, there is validity to it, and there is also contextual depth to it, right? Artists don't emerge out of nothing; they emerge out of a moment in time, culture, and maybe as a response to other things that are going on. But as to whether she was a painter in the 20th century, she had a husband, but she had affairs with all these other literary figures or artists or whatever. Why do I care? Unless it's relevant to the work, why would you care? And I think we should stop obsessing in art and culture over quote-unquote perfect behaviour, because there's no such thing. Human beings make mistakes. And we can't, I don't think it's especially useful to hold artists up to some sort of impossible, perfect standard, which is constantly evolving. I mean, I don't know. And a lot of it's basically, I guess, done to generate headlines, right? Just provocative title. And like I said, I don't think this means that Picasso, an example, is beyond reproach. Yeah, he was probably a bit of a knob, right? A lot of artists are in the past or even in now. I think there was something with some controversy with Chuck Close a while ago. He's like a quite famous contemporary painter. And also, oh god, what's that guy's name? The guy does all the upside down expressionist paintings, big ones, German guy. We said something like ridiculous, like women can't paint. I can't remember what the guy's name is off the top of my head. Basilitz does it. Who said some ridiculous bullshit like women can't paint, you know, sort of like this. Men make better painters, blah 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 blah, whatever. Like, fine, whatever. He's just a sort of old man who is saying something that's ridiculous. Doesn't mean his work is not relevant or isn't worthy of still looking at in the time and context to when it was made. Just means that he's got some regressive views, which he's free to have. I don't know. I think probably a lot of people will find this just like I'm being ridiculous or I'm being, I don't know. That's all my thoughts on it basically. It's almost a half an hour long video. Anyway, I'll leave this video there. Probably some thoughts to chew on, some reflections to think about. Obviously, hopefully some of it's a bit interesting. Yeah. Like and subscribe, obviously. I'll try and do some more videos soon. Probably try and do some more videos talking about my own art in some respects. I've been a bit out of posting just because I've had lots of stuff I'm trying to sort out at the minute. I'm back living up north, so I'm trying to sort various things out. Anyway, in a bit.